Redditors, what's the most metal thing you've ever seen? Steve Owen wrestles a croc back into the river, stands up and looks at his hand. Crikey, I dislocated my finger. Grabs his finger and pops it back into place, then double takes. Wait, never mind. It's broken. Steve was something else, man, lol. There was an article about a rapist who threw gasoline on his victim and proceeded to light her up in an effort to shut her up for good. She dragged him into the flames to burn with her. My boss drilled into his hand when a bit slipped, got his knife out, picked the filings of steel that got into his hand, got the alcohol and poured it over, slapped crazy glue to close the gap and drove to the hospital. The crazy part is that his face never changed, no emotion at all. The line between metal and farmer is a thin one indeed. Didn't see this firsthand, but my dad's friend told us about one time when his dog chased a bear up a tree. In a dog versus bear fight, the bear would win every time, but they tend to be pretty timid, so this dog treed it. The guy calls his dog back into the house, but before leaving, the dog pees on the tree with the bear in it. Super ballsy on the dog's part. That's what we call a power move. I didn't witness it directly, but it absolutely qualifies. A few months back my friend noticed his 18-year-old cat seemed sick, just really lethargic, and seemed to have a small wound bump on his tail. He kept an eye on him for a day or two, seeing if he was going to have to take him into the vet. 2 days later, the cat barfs up a dead black widow spider, and legitimately went back to normal after and cleaned his tail wound himself and it healed. This freaking cat was bit by a black widow and then ate it and came out completely fine. So metal. Birthed in gasoline in a junkyard for sure. I used to have a basset hound and a tiny cow-looking chihuahua. Basset hounds have a nose and a desire to hunt. One time a hawk came down, trying to carry away the chihuahua. As it swooped, it didn't get a chance to grab the tiny cow because my basset caught its neck, brought it to the ground, and started methodically breaking all its bones by running its jaw up and down the hawk's body until it laid there dying, unable to move. My dog won't even eat other animals, it just hunts. At the time I was a CT tech at a major trauma hospital. Patient comes with gunshot wound to forehead self-inflicted with a .22 caliber. They were alert and orientated and following directions but kept trying to put their finger in the hole. They were surprised there was a hole in their forehead. My grandpa survived 3 brain tumors. They removed large parts of his brain, though, and he had multiple grand mal, IDK how to spell, seizures. He averaged almost 1 seizure a day if I recall correctly. Regular treatment wasn't really working, so his amazing surgeon guy put electrodes in his brain that stopped the seizures for a good 7 months. My grandpa was a cyborg for a short amount of time. That, and he was given up as a kid. Tortured because his parents abandoned him to a state school, where they electrocuted him because they misdiagnosed him with autism. He was called in for the draft for Vietnam pretty much as soon as he was able. They rejected him for his mental health background, to which he stubbornly said frick you, I am enlisting, and he said Vietnam was easier than his childhood in a lot of ways. He spent his life advocating for autistic rights. If you don't believe me, they wrote a book about him. You'll like it here by Edor Zechowski, again spelling IDK if that's right. My grandpa was a Vietnam veteran cyborg who fought for autistic rights. I love that man so much. I worked at a music venue downtown in my city. Every Saturday was a mix of punk rockers and metalheads who came down for 80s night. This disheveled dude stumbled in and walks up to the bar. He, long greasy hair, a bloodied busted lip with 2 matching black eyes, reeking of whiskey and a bad attitude. Me, 6 hours into a PBR drinker's shift with a tip bucket full of change and the occasional dollar. He orders a PBR and hands me a $10. I give him a $5 and 2 singles. I go to turn to the cooler to grab his drink and he yells something along the lines of, "Where's the rest of my freaking money?" I snap back, tell him he gave me a $10, and turned the till to show him the empty $20 spot. We didn't keep large dollars in the register. because we dealt in pocket change for $3 tall boys and $5 40s. As I go to grab the register and turn it back towards myself, ignoring his demand for money, I feel the dang thing slip between my fingers as I watch this freaking fool lift it over his head. I hear people yelling as they realize what's about to happen, while I drop behind the bar in hopes he doesn't bash my brains. In a matter of seconds, I hear the most animalistic growl and heave as I watch the sucker toss the register over my head, flying right into the glass bar. This was the mother of all oddly satisfying sounds. A giant bar mirror with 6 glass shelves, 50 plus glass bottles of liquor and assorted beer breaking into bits and raining down all around me. In the darkness, the neon lights shining through the glass mimicking sparklers shooting out of the wall where an entire bar stood a moment earlier. It all happened in a minute, feeling like an eternity. Then it all ended swiftly as the bouncers moved in, picking this guy up over their heads, throw him down 2 staircases, toss him out the door and beat the dog crap out of him. It was just another Cincinnati Saturday night. Cincinnati, it ain't glamorous but goddamn does it got personality. I watched an epic fight between a spider wasp and a huntsman spider. It went on for about 10 minutes and was like a kind of mini Godzilla, King of the Monsters vibe. It ended with the spider wasp winning and dragging the spider back into a big hole in my garden wall. It was freaking intense. Australian wildlife is metal AF. You need to film that kinda crap and put it on YouTube. I'd sub to your channel so fast. Punk rock, not metal. Big kids were getting kicked out of a show by security for stage diving and the band stopped their set to invite everyone on stage to sing with them. Cause you can't kick out everyone. I can't remember the band for sure, but I wanna say it was Rancid. That sounds very punk rock. Old lady I used to take care of, she was an aircraft mechanic in her youth during World War II. She fought me tooth and nail every time I went in to help her. One day in the dining room she fell out of her wheelchair and busted her head wide open. She was 95. Blood everywhere. This lady stands up, blood running down her face. We rushed to help her. She looked me dead in the face and said frick off. I don't need any help. We called an ambulance. One of my friends has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Far worse than myself. I remember once her foot fell out from under her on a staircase. She slipped down and ended up a curled and contorted mess, having dislocated both shoulders and twisted her legs underneath her. Before I could even get down the stairs and help, she started popping her joints back in and untangling herself. It was like watching a marionette build itself from a pile of parts. Either truly metal or nightmare fodder. My sister has EDS. The phrase "I dislocated my shoulder, but I popped it back in, so I'm okay" has been said far more frequently than any 13-year-old should have to say. There's a whale autopsy video where the whale is paraded through a town and then basically explodes because of built-up gas. That was pretty metal. My aunt got a radioactive seed implanted in her liver as part of last case scenario cancer treatment. It had to be transported in a huge lead box. Her bed had lead plates on them that were like walls. None of us could touch her or sit near her because she was radioactive. She didn't get any superpowers, which sucked. But her attitude throughout is what made it really metal to me. When things are bad enough that having a radioactive seed implanted inside your body is a good idea, then things are pretty dang bad. She had a 50% chance of dying 24 hours after having it implanted. She found out a little while later that it didn't work. Her words when she came out of the room after being told she was terminal were, "Welp, that's me stuffed, isn't it? I miss her." I know you meant lead, but I am imagining the medical professionals carried this radioactive seed around in an over-the-top RGB razor style box. When I was a kid we were out riding out bikes around in summer break. I saw some of the older high school kids come hauling butt around the corner on the back streets of my town in a VW Bug, and rolled it. Passenger window was open and no seat belts. Passenger got ejected, flew about 10 feet through the air butt over tea kettle and landed on his feet. The Bug had rolled back onto its wheels and he gave us a thumbs up and jumped back in the car and they drove off. Blew my freaking grade school mind. It was cooler than anything I ever saw on Dukes of Hazzard. Shot myself in the thumb with a 16-penny nail from a nail gun. The metal part was when I removed it with a pair of vice grips. As it scraped across my bone, I passed out. I learned the meaning of when the bullet hits the bone. When I was younger, maybe 16, this young kid walks up to me all angry, slapped my smoothie to the ground and walks away. No words, just eye contact and a man on a mission. I'll find you one of these days, Austin. Austin is in Texas. 2 lines of angry bikers on a 4-lane road having created a road crossing for a family of moose. Bikers weren't actually angry, and my dad was among them. It was his biker club. No backpatch, no selling of drugs, just a bunch of friendly guys who like to ride motorcycles. I was 5 at the time. We were in Norway. Extra metal part at the end as Moose dad decided that a pair of extra tall handlebars on a motorcycle was a challenger to his authority. The rider was the club longboard. He essentially looked like a biker Santa Claus. He revved his bike. Moose dad begins roaring back until the motor noise gets big enough for him to run. I'm starting to think Norway is the most metal country on earth. My dad is the most timid Christian man in the world. Few years back we were hanging out Christmas lights and setting the yard decorations out. My parents have a metal framed nativity scene with the whole gang, 3 kings, and the others, animals, etc. It's a bee to put together. My dad ended up so frazzled he took a pole from it and just started to beat the crap out of baby Jesus. This resulted in a beloved story told annually about how dad brutally murdered baby Jesus. It's always the quiet ones. Me and a buddy of mine were mid-crowd at a Dragon Force show in 2005. We were helping people get up for crowd surfing, and it had been about 15 minutes at this point. My friend looks at me and says, "Well, I gotta go. It's my turn now," and without even saying anything, he makes a Superman pose and the guy's right in front of us. Without saying anything, just boost him up and he is passed to the front in that pose. Hilarious. Another time, Bill Kelleher of Mastodon was flicking his picks into the crowd at the end of a show and one hit me in the eye and got stuck. That's how I earned one of my concert picks. I was beaten by a mob in order to get a drumstick from Rob Zombie. Suckers nearly broke my ribs. I saw a falcon attack a squirrel's nest and it kept going back for the babies, tearing them apart, then throwing them to the ground. Then the parent squirrel jumped at the falcon and it literally tore the poor thing's head clean off and its headless body fell to its mangled children. Yeah, wrap this thread up. We're done here. I saw 3 deer corner a small child and eat his ice cream. Child was screaming like deer whilst his Japanese mother filmed the whole thing cackling to herself. Metal. Screaming like Dio. My ice curry moo. My mother dearest always had lots of problem with her inside baby making parts. She has had a lot of surgeries done, to the point where all her stomach area is numb. I guess the apple does not fall far from the tree. Guess who started having the same problems? Me. However, mine took a step further. I had an unsuspecting cyst growing in my ovary. Didn't feel a thing until it started trying to tear out of the ovary. 5 lbs. Excruciating pain. Ambulance and a long emergency surgery. Had to have the ovary taken out. Was knocked out for 2 days. 3rd day, gain consciousness. After about 10 days, I got to start walking so that the stitches settle and all that jazz. So they bring 2 nurses and a walker when I'm ready and I'm like, WTF. I can walk. I don't need support to walk. They help me sit up on the edge of the bed and guys, as soon as my feet touched the ground and I tried to stand, this pain that was out of this universe shot through me and knocked me unconscious on the spot. Woke up 30 minutes later. Doc said they had legit cut open and stitched back together my body, inside and out, and I can't just put pressure on it. However, since I was young, I should be able to slowly start walking in about 3 weeks and return to usual activity in about 3-4 months if everything healed properly. So the reason I'm telling you this is because at that moment I remember the countless number of surgeries of this type, and some even more extensive, my mother had. Every single one of them scheduled on a Friday. She'd be back at the house on Sunday. On Monday, she was up at dawn to make me and my sister food and lunch for school and dinner. She would wince, but I never understood why until that moment. She was back on her feet and resumed taking care of her family on Monday with tubes and crap hooked and attached to her. I never understood or comprehended the kind of pain and intensity of it that she went through. It took me a year almost to be able to jog without the scar throbbing, and this woman freaking defied all pain to make sure her children were taken care of. There is nothing more metal than my mother. That's definitely metal as frick. I once saw a lady break the glass at a grocery store, grab 4 things of formula and take off from the loss prevention dude. She was crying, but then her face just turned to pure determination. She made it to her car, which was running outside, and took off with her car door still open out of the parking lot. It made me sad, but I was impressed. Had an inmate slice his arm open with a razor before swallowing it. While we waited for backup, he calmly sprayed blood all over the cell and counted. Then, when he'd lost enough blood, he tore a strip off of his shirt, tied it around his arm to stop the blood loss, and cuffed up. Dude was just a bit crazy. Swallowing it, a bit crazy yet. One time I was at the food library and this dude just pushed his forehead against the glass of the deli case until it broke. Then he reached his hand in and grabbed some sausages and walked away. Absolutely brutal. I guess I'll be the guy to pretend to be shocked you said food library instead of supermarket. At a concert, a few guys beating the frick out of each other in the pit. One of them fall. Everybody stop and help him clean up and make sure he's okay before giving him a beer. That's metal. Mosh pits definitely have unspoken rules. 1. If you are at the edge of the pit, you're in the pit. 2. If you don't want to be in the pit, move away from the pit. 3. If someone falls, you always help them up. I was at a show for some hardcore band, I think Whitechapel, down in Wilmington, NC, with a bunch of other Marines. We were just out looking to get drunk and rowdy, and hardcore shows seemed to be a good place for it. Anyhow, at the venue, Soapbox Lounge, looks like it's closed now. Security would generally let a person climb up on stage every once in a while as long as they turned and did their stage dive and the show went on. So, middle of the show, some kid climbs up there, jumps around with the bassist for a second, and then gets on the front of the stage, but just poses and doesn't dive. He's just standing in the middle of the stage drinking in the atmosphere and basking in the chaos. Security starts slowly working their way over to this kid, but the bassist he was just jumping around with plays his way up behind this guy, turns a little, and this is Sparta kicks the sucker out into the crowd, full on punts him. The house went nuts. No idea what happened to the kid, but that's what you get. I think I got both of my eyes blackened in the pit that night. Good times. Randy Blythe from Lamb of God did something similar to this in Croatia, I believe, and accidentally killed a guy. Chicago Open Air 16. Right before Meshuggah played, there were these vibrant double rainbows. Entire crowd was chanting double rainbow before getting their faces melted off. I remember in college we had psycho squirrels on campus. I once saw the end of a fight between two and the losing squirrel had had its tail torn off. The winner triumphantly carried off the corpse of the other one in its jaws. I once saw the guy intentionally cut his own throat open. It was on one of my mentored shifts while I was studying to be a paramedic, EMT for you Americans. We got a pretty vague sounding call that this guy had hurt himself, and so we were dispatched to his home. When we drove down his driveway, we saw him standing on a balcony looking down at us. He said, "Thank God you're here. Watch this," and proceeded to pull a knife blade across his throat. Luckily he didn't sever his carotid arteries and had minimal damage to his trachea. Impressive amount of blood though. We got him to hospital in a stable condition, but I have no idea what happened after that. He was obviously quite mentally unwell, and our country's mental health care leaves a lot to be desired. But there's always a chance he made a good recovery. Reflecting back on the incident afterwards though, all I could think was that was the most metal thing I've ever witnessed. Was at a concert, lightning bolt, and had the fortune of being at a show where a good 60% of the floor was a mosh pit. Before we get too far, it's important to note, if you've never been in one, there is a code of ethics in a mosh pit. Chief among these is to never take a mosh pit personally. No one is trying to run into you, per se, it's just people cutting loose and roughhousing. So, we had a mother who didn't understand this rule. He was about 6 feet 2 inches and built like a brick shithouse. Anytime he got hit, he'd wheel around, find the likely culprit, and give them a too hard shove. This goes on through the duration of a full song, and everyone around him had grown to notice. Next song comes up and, wouldn't you know it, cause he's in a freaking mosh pit, the dude gets shoved again. He turns to attack some kid just trying to have fun, when out of nowhere someone tackles this dude down to the ground. He popped up to see his assailant, who was a 5'2" feet woman who must have weighed $110. Clearly had hit him at just the right time where she caught him off guard and knew her crap well enough to know when to do it. She stepped up to a guy who had a full foot on her and threw her arm backs, as if to say, "What now?" Dude left the pit. I ran up to her and high-fived her. "You're the coolest person here by a mile," she smiled. "Thanks," and shoved me back into the pit. If she ever runs for president, she's getting my vote. It's the most metal crap I've ever seen. Goddamn. A mosh pit at a lightning bolt show sounds intense. I don't know why, but I never really expected you'd get a pit at a show like that. Now I want to do it. I was at a sewed concert and the shirtless guy behind me fired a flare gun into the sky whilst windmilling his dreadlocks. I crap myself. Was really loud. Looked cool though. More recently I saw Josh Homme launch his full cup of beer at a female photographer down at the front of the stage. It hit her square in the face. Hard. At the exact same time it hit her, Josh started playing First It Giveth. Strobe lights started going crazy and she just disappeared in an explosion of light and beer. I felt sorry for her, but frick me, that was awesome. Does actual metal count? Milton Keynes Bowl, 2001 I think. Monster Magnet on the second stage. The only way down to the front was through a line of windmilling Viking nutcases. And once we made it to the front, in a slightly bruised state, Dave Windorf took issue with the organizers cutting his set short and set fire to the stage. Life Flight Crew. Helicopter 5 featuring off the ground flying horizontal for 200s between power lines and a row of trees to get our ambulance to transport a patient. One night working security on a bad side of my town, I watched a crackhead take on 5 guys by himself naked and win. I don't know why they were fighting, all I know is this crackhead went from dressed to naked in less than 10 seconds and was dishing out haymakers like a used car salesman sells shitty cars. That was the moment I legitimately thought that crackheads are an untapped military resource. 40,000 people chanting "frick you, I won't do what you tell me" after Rage had just finished their set and not played Killing in the Name. The energy we all felt when they came back on and Morello plays that first chord was possibly the most metal thing I've experienced. Went to an open stadium NIM concert and watched a guy rip a tree out at the back, set it on fire, and then march it up to the crowd barrier while digital flames rained down on the giant screen. I was like 10 and walked out onto my back porch to see my cat hunched over something. Here's some visuals to put it into perspective. My cat was a beautiful strippy grey and white American shorthair with icy yellow eyes, and he was constantly in stalk mode. He had the face of a very small grey lion and did not blink much. He looks up at me, staring directly into my soul, and his usually white chin is completely coated in blood. I walk up to him and look down. He's snapped this pigeon's neck and ripped its torso open so that its ribcage is sticking out and upwards like an anatomical model. I can see literally all of its organs. Heart still beating, foot twitching. My cat slowly blinks at me, then eats the entire liver of the pigeon in one bite, and walks back into the house. I think my cat embodied Satan just a little. I had just parked my car and was getting out of the driver's seat when 10 feet in front of me, a red-tailed hawk swooped in out of nowhere, grabbed a pigeon and flew off. Made me think about my own mortality for a second. Then I carried on with the rest of my day. I worked at a recording studio in LA for nearly 10 years. We had Slayer in to make a record. The first day Tom Araya comes out to the reception area with a white cardboard box and says, "I just printed a picture from my laptop. Where would it have printed?" I told him it would most likely have printed in the office and grabbed it for him. It was a printout of a photo of a 12-ish-year-old girl in a white dress. He then asked for a pair of scissors and some tape. He proceeded to cut the photo out, and then he opened the white box, which was full of candy bars and was one of those fundraiser boxes with a money slot that you see kids carrying to sell candy for their school. He taped the photo to the folded open box and said, "I told my niece I would help her with her elementary school fundraiser. Is it okay if I leave this up at reception? The candy bars are $1 if any of you would like to buy one." We all bought multiple candy bars. Slayer was in for a couple of weeks, and he was the nicest of guys. TLDR. Tom Araya with an elementary school fundraiser box full of candy bars. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.